Discover the amazing transformation. Janitor's unexpected act changed everything for Billionaire. Jim wiped the sweat from his brow as he navigated the polished corridors of Hawthorne University, a place where dreams thrived and ambitions soared. Each swish of his mop echoed the footsteps of the eager students racing toward their futures. But here he was, 40 years old, trapped in a janitor's uniform, haunted by bills and the weight of familial responsibility since his father passed away. Deep down, Jim's soul ached for something more, a desire to write and share his poetry, but the demands of his life stifled that spark. The small family photos tucked in his wallet were reminders of sacrifices made. Thoughts of rent, groceries, and his children's education drowned out the lyrical whispers of his heart. "How can I chase dreams when they barely survive the day?" he often mused, scrubbing floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights, feeling the edge of desperation sharpen with each passing day. His dreams piled on top of his reality, each poem never written, every word renegotiated in favor of the menial task at hand. He clenched his jaw, wrestling with waves of doubt. Would he ever be heard? One evening, beneath the whispering shelves of the library, Jim stumbled upon a stack of discarded blueprints. They bore the mark of Blake Morgan, the relentless tech mogul whose name was synonymous with innovation, yet whose life felt achingly empty. Jim sensed an odd connection with Blake, sensing the isolation that both were trapped by, one in a gilded cage of privilege and the other in a prison of servitude. The irony gnawed at him. Here was a man with everything, yet nothing, while Jim felt like a ghost drifting through halls of greatness. Compelled by something profound, Jim studied the blueprints. They radiated potential, buried under a layer of rejection. His heart raced, the quiet library suddenly buzzing with possibilities. He could almost hear the words from his unwritten poems ripple through the air. Each cutting line he penned into the margins turned his labor into art, an act of defiance, an uninvited challenge to the man whose path felt so different from his own. Yet beneath that defiance lay a flicker of fear. Was he out of his depth? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. When Blake discovered Jim's revisions, the air shifted. Doubt crept in. He hesitated to acknowledge the brilliance unspooling before him. Part of Blake wanted to dismiss it outright. A laborer had no place redefining his vision. But Jim's raw honesty flickering through each line struck a chord, stirring something within him that wealth and status could not touch. Blake faced a crossroads where his privilege clashed violently with the delicate vulnerability that Jim's unexpected contribution evoked. Jim stood at the precipice of self-advocacy, steeling his spine against the surging waves of insecurity. This confrontation with Blake wasn't just about sketches and ideas, it was about respect, recognition of his hidden talents in a world that looked past men like him. Tension thickened, emotions crackled beneath the surface. Would Blake take a step into the unknown, tearing down the walls of hierarchy? Could Jim finally claim his voice, or would they both retreat into their respective shadows? The room pulsed with unsaid words, as the realization loomed that each man must face the truths that underpinned their existence. Jim's fear of being unseen, and Blake's fear of connection. With futures hanging in delicate balance, they remained on the edge, Anticipation clean and raw, brimming with uncharted possibilities. Jim's heart raced as he stood facing Blake, the silence elongated, thick with potential and unspoken fears. He could feel the weight of the blueprints in his hands, marked, revised, transformed. They weren't just sheets of paper anymore. They were fragments of a dream he dared to express. Blake's expression flickered, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. The billionaire's brow furrowed, revealing a man who had long been sheltered by his own success. "You understand this?" he finally asked, his tone wavering between skepticism and intrigue. "Yes," Jim replied, his voice steadier than he felt inside. "You've built something remarkable, but there's depth missing. My revisions? Maybe they can help you see what's between the lines." Each word he spoke shed the weight of his uniform, allowing his hidden self to emerge, raw and unpolished. "What makes you think you can redefine my vision?" Blake challenged, crossing his arms, a protective barrier against the vulnerability he sensed approaching. Jim took a breath, feeling both fragile and strong in that moment. "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible. I understand how it feels to have an idea suppressed. You're not living the dream either. You're just filling a role." The words hung in the air, charged and electric. Blake faltered, his eyes narrowing as he began to process Jim's pointed truth. The admission felt like a dare, both men standing on the precipice of a personal reckoning. "Well, what do you even know about tech, about running a company?" Blake shot back, masking the quiver in his voice with bravado. "I know what it's like to create something from nothing," Jim countered, surprising himself with the boldness in his tone. "To find beauty in the mundane. I may clean these halls, but it doesn't make my thoughts any less valuable." With a swift motion, Blake pulled the blueprints closer. The vibrant revisions danced under the fluorescent lights, a language of potential swimming in the margins. It was almost as if, beneath the surface, he could see a reflection of his own entrapment, mirroring Jim's struggle. The atmosphere shifted again. Blake lowered his arms, uncertainty lacing his features. "What would you suggest we do then?" he queried, a hint of vulnerability slipping through his guarded demeanor. Jim felt a thrill ignite within him, the spark of his long-suppressed dream flaring to life. "Collaborate," he proposed, although hesitation gnawed at him. What did he know of partnerships with billionaires? "Let's integrate both our visions. Yours has the structure, mine offers the soul." The astonishment in Blake's eyes indicated a recipe for conflict brewing beneath the surface. This wasn't just a business proposal. It was an invitation for mutual discovery. Jim's offer exposed their fears. Collaboration demanded trust, and trust required both to dismantle their fortified identities. As Blake mulled over Jim's proposal, the fear of stepping outside his comfort zone clashed with the allure of innovation. Jim seized the moment, determination hardening in his chest. This could be a defining pivot, a shift from being a mere observer in his life to a participator in its narrative. But with that exhilaration came the voice of doubt. Could he really confront a man of Blake's stature? What if his insights fell flat or were ridiculed? Just then, Blake spoke, breaking the silence with a challenge of his own. "If we do this, if I trust you, then you must promise not to hide. You're part of this now." Jim nodded, the gravity of this pledge settling over him like a weight, with the potential of liberation sparking in his mind. Would he rise to the occasion, or would he retreat into the shadows of his past, forever confined to the edges of other stories? That pivotal challenge hung like a ghost in the air, outlining the path leading ahead, a journey intertwined with risk and possibility. With the stakes set higher than ever, Jim felt the ground shift beneath him. There was no turning back now. The moment had come for a leap into the unknown. But just as a glimmer of certainty sparked within him, a sudden realization washed over him. What if embracing this opportunity meant letting go of old fears entirely? Jim's heart pounded in his chest as he processed Blake's words. "You're part of this now." The weight of that statement reverberated deep within him, stoking both excitement and anxiety. He had always been the observer, an invisible thread weaving through the fabric of a world he could not penetrate. Now he stood on the precipice of becoming an integral part of that world, but fear loomed large in the shadows, whispering doubts that threatened to swallow him whole. Turning away from Blake, Jim focused on the blueprints spread out on the table between them. Each change he'd made felt significant, each mark a declaration of intent. The revisions showcased creativity, but they also bore the scars of vulnerability. His dreams intricately intertwined with fear of exposure. He had proposed collaboration, yet the reality of opening himself up to scrutiny gnawed at him. What if Blake found his ideas lacking? What if the billionaire dismissed his insights as mere whims of a janitor? The thought danced like a flame too close to the wick of his resolve, threatening to extinguish the burgeoning embers of confidence he'd nurtured. "Let's set some ground rules," Blake interrupted his internal spiral, his tone now more deliberate. "If we're going to do this, we need structure, boundaries. I can't have you scrambling through the chaos of starting afresh while I attempt to steer the ship." Jim looked up, meeting Blake's intense gaze. This was a challenge, one that required him to be more than just a passive participant. "I can handle that," he replied, his voice firmer than before. "Create a timeline, set milestones. I want this to be a meaningful process for both of us." "Good," Blake nodded, making quick notes. "And just as you integrate your vision, I need you to be absolutely transparent. We can't afford hidden agendas or misunderstandings." As the two began drafting their collaboration framework, Jim felt a shift within himself. The weight of suspicion began to lift. The dialogue became more direct, infusing him with an exhilarating sense of purpose. He was no longer just the custodian behind the scenes. He was actively mapping out a future. In the weeks that followed, Jim found himself in meetings, pushing against the confines he had accepted for so long. With each brainstorming session, he shared insights that revealed a depth he had not previously acknowledged. Together, they crafted presentations, poring over ideas late into the night, adrift in the lure of potential. Feelings of isolation seeped away, replaced by an unexpected camaraderie, forged in mutual respect. Yet with every gain came a subtle unrest. In the quiet hours, fear would creep back in, reminding him of old patterns. The memories of being looked over echoed loud in his mind. The moments when he felt his presence in the room evaporate as people evaluated some unseen criteria that always seemed to exclude him. One evening, after a particularly long session where their minds had clicked and sparked, he noticed Blake leaning back in his chair, exhaustion painted across his features. "What's the biggest risk for you in all of this?" he asked, his brows furrowing in a mixture of concern and curiosity. For the first time, Jim's answer stuttered, caught off guard by the question's intimacy. "I guess I worry that if I truly show who I am, I won't be accepted," he confessed, his voice wavering slightly. "That, behind the blueprints, it's just a janitor trying to be something else." Blake's gaze softened. "You're not just a janitor now. You're part of something bigger. Don't hide who you are." That night, as Jim lay in bed, he wrestled with the breadth of what had been uncovered. The very idea of becoming who he dreamed of being illuminated corners of his mind he hadn't thought of in years. Did he truly believe he was worthy of this new journey? With dawn came clarity. An unyielding resolve settled over him. He would step forward. He would break through the walls of fear. As he prepared to face the new day, anticipation churned in his gut. They were scheduled to present their combined vision to a panel of executives later that week, a chance to showcase what he and Blake had created together. But beneath the excitement loomed another tremor of anxiety. Would they see the value in his contributions? Or would their skepticism extinguish the flame he had dared to ignite? The moment of truth approached, and everything hung in the balance. Would Jim rise or crumble? This pivotal moment could forever redefine who he had become. But as he steeled himself for what lay ahead, one thing flickered in his mind. The climax of doubt was brewing. Jim stood at the edge of his small kitchen, the early morning light filtering through the window, casting shadows across the cluttered counter. The scent of coffee hung thick in the air, yet it did little to calm the storm brewing in his chest. It was finally the day of their presentation, and the weight of expectation pressed heavily upon him. Each tick of the clock sang a reminder of his impending exposure to judgment. He shuffled through his notes, but the words blurred together, slipping through his fingers as his mind wandered to the faces he would soon encounter. Executives, each more formidable than the last. Would they see him as a mere janitor, a footnote in this bold venture? In that moment, the soothing familiarity of his old life beckoned him like a mirage, whispering that retreat could shield him from rejection. But deep inside, another voice stirred, one that urged him to harness this moment as a turning point in his journey. After another sip of coffee, Jim made a choice. He would not shy away from the stage. He would command it. Flipping through the pages, he focused on the sections he would emphasize, inner strength igniting as he rehearsed his delivery. He visualized the impact he wanted to make, crafting not just a presentation, but a story, his story intertwined with Blake's, that would resonate with the executives. On the drive to the conference room, an unsettling tension gripped him. The sleek glass facade of the building loomed in front of him like an impenetrable barrier to his aspirations. He parked and took a moment to breathe. Would his authenticity lift him? Or would it expose the very insecurities he longed to hide? He realized that each moment they had spent collaborating wasn't just about creating a project, it had been about rediscovering himself in the process. As he entered the building, Jim was greeted by the cool, air-conditioned atmosphere, a stark contrast to the heat of his racing heart. He could hear laughter and animated conversations spilling from behind the conference room doors. Communication and connection he was still learning to navigate. Blake caught sight of him just before the presentation. His supportive nod was reassuring, firing up the courage buried within Jim. They huddled briefly, exchanging a few final words about their strategy. But as their names were called, the instant wave of anxiety threatened to suffocate him. Focus on your strengths, he reminded himself, pushing through the doorway. Inside, the panel of executives stared at them, blank expressions hiding innumerable expectations. Blake began speaking, setting up their narrative, and Jim felt the rising pressure of performance expectations. When it was Jim's turn, eyes fell on him like spotlights, magnifying his vulnerabilities. Then he breathed deeply and began. With each elaborated point, he shared not just facts and data, but the passion behind their project. The hours spent unraveling ideas late at night, the laughter they shared, the collective imagination that sparked a sense of purpose. He pulled from the fabric of his journey, a janitor among billionaires, and felt strength growing with each word. As he elaborated on the vision, Jim caught the glimmer of intrigue in their eyes and the faint nods of approval. The fear of crumbling transformed into a thrilling realization that perhaps, just perhaps, acceptance was possible. The initial faces of skepticism began to soften. The presentation flowed seamlessly, culminating in a moment that felt almost electric. Blake launched into the final points, and Jim could sense the shifting energy in the room. They had managed to weave a narrative that resonated deeply with their audience, solidifying their creative vision as not just good, but essential. When the executives began to applaud, a mix of relief and exhilaration washed over Jim. The anxiety that had threatened to consume him now morphed into an exhilarating sense of triumph. Perhaps he had earned a seat at the table, after all. But as they stepped out of the room, Jim could feel the remnants of doubt still lurking nearby. Blake leaned in closer, an expression of pride lighting up his features. "You were outstanding," he said, and Jim couldn't help but smile in return. Yet, underneath this perceived victory, a new question loomed, a challenge wrapped in uncertainty. What would happen next? As they walked into the hallway, surrounded by the hum of post-presentation discussions, Jim felt the anticipation of future challenges curling in the air around him. How would success redefine his identity? Would he continue to rise, or would fear find another way to pull him back down? As he mulled over these thoughts, he realized one thing. The journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The applause lingered in Jim's ears as he left the conference room, a sweet residue of validation mixed with a tinge of trepidation. He was still grappling with the implications of his performance. Had he truly crossed a threshold, or was this merely a flicker of light in a dark corridor of uncertainty? Blake, brimming with enthusiasm, began recounting all the positive feedback they had received. "Did you see the look on Miss Hawkins' face? I think we've got a real shot here, Jim. They see potential." Each enthusiastic word from Blake was a buoy in a turbulent sea of self-doubt. Jim nodded along, offering sparse affirmations while his thoughts spiraled down a rabbit hole. He was on the brink of something significant, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of much larger challenges. Their next step loomed dauntingly ahead. How to build on this moment? Conversations pitched around him, riddled with industry jargon and prophetic pronouncements that seemed miles beyond his comprehension. He felt a pull toward the coffee station instead, seeking solace in the familiar ritual. As he poured himself a cup, he caught a reflection of himself in the shiny chrome surface. Would he ever feel worthy in this world? With each sip, Jim built resolve. The presentation had been a test, and in meeting it, he had uncovered dormant pieces of himself. He didn't just share a story. He had accurately articulated a vision that intertwined his past struggles with a hopeful future. Yet now, that initial victory felt almost like a trap. Could he replicate it? Time would tell. "Jim, are you okay?" Blake's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. Jim turned, catching the concern in his friend's eyes. "Just processing everything," Jim replied, forcing a smile. He didn't want to burden Blake with the murky waters of his insecurity. "Let's capitalize on this momentum. We need to focus on our next steps. Maybe we could reach out to some partners for funding," Blake continued, the enthusiasm infectious. "Yeah, right," Jim said, yet a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. Who would invest in a project led by someone they saw merely as a janitor? "I mean, you know my background. What if—" His voice faltered, an avalanche of doubts flooding over him again. "Hey," Blake interjected, stepping closer, "don't sell yourself short. You're integral to this now. I wouldn't be saying this if I didn't believe it. You have talents." But Jim couldn't readily accept the compliments. They felt like they were draped over him like a heavy coat, heavy with expectation. "What if this was a one-time thing?" he murmured. "What if the next time I falter? What does that say about me?" "Jim, you've just taken a leap that many would shy away from." Blake's voice held a firmness that commanded Jim's attention. "You have to trust in your ability to grow. You were impactful today because you were real. Own that." As they discussed potential strategies, Jim felt a slow dawning of clarity. Trusting himself was the only way forward. It felt unsteady, almost reckless, but if there was one truth Jim had gathered, it was the realization he couldn't simply hide behind past identities. He had a project now, a vision to cultivate. The conversation shifted toward identifying potential partners and investors, and Jim found himself contributing suggestions, his confidence wavering yet gradually solidifying. The more they spoke, the more he realized something. He was not the only one who had something to prove. Every person in the room was carving their path, just as he was. By the time they parted ways, Jim felt invigorated yet unsettled. He had embraced an identity that threatened to dismantle the old one, and yes, it was exhilarating. As he stepped outside, the brisk air hit his face like a wake-up call, illuminating the shadows of self-doubt still lurking within. But lurking, he realized, wasn't enough. He had to confront those doubts, challenge them head-on. He had a choice. Would he allow insecurity to define him, or would he brave the next stage of his journey, even if it meant unearthing every fear and inadequacy? With resolve hardening in his chest, he made a decision. He would not only rise, he would dig deeper into what he was capable of. Slowly walking toward his car, Jim felt a surge of unyielding determination. The path ahead unfurled with questions that felt both daunting and electrifying. Who would he become if he engaged fully in this transformation? And more importantly, how would he face the looming challenges that success might invite? As shadows lengthened, a thought crystallized within him. This was just the prelude. The real test awaited, and for the first time in a long while, he was ready to face it. Jim awoke the next morning to the dull hum of city life filtering through his apartment window. Sunlight streamed in, but rather than illuminating, it felt like an interrogation light, forcing him to confront the reality of his choices. The exhilaration from the day before began to dissipate quickly, replaced with the familiar weight of anxiety. He shuffled to the bathroom, each step echoing with self-doubt. He stared at his reflection. The person looking back seemed foreign. The confident individual who had stood before an audience was now a figure cloaked in uncertainty. Questions raced through his mind. What would the next steps entail? How could he project the same confidence again, let alone magnify it? Still, beneath that tumultuous wave of emotion, there was a flicker of resolve. Jim knew he needed to prepare for the conversations with potential partners. He had to strategize, transform his ideas into something tangible. Following on the conversation, Jim knew he needed to prepare for the conversations with potential partners. He had to strategize, transform his ideas into something tangible. A different side of himself needed to emerge, one that could navigate the uncharted waters of business architecture, not just relate personal anecdotes. He flipped open his laptop and began rattling off notes, jotting down bullet points and sketching out a timeline. The more he structured his thoughts, the more the vision began to crystallize. Everything he had learned while working for others, the intricacies of management, the art of persuasion, suddenly felt relevant. It was akin to discovering long-forgotten tools tucked away in a shed. He had the instruments he needed to sculpt his ambition. Elena, a colleague he had respected for her analytical mind, always spoke about market dynamics. Maybe she could offer insights into the feasibility of his ideas. Steeling himself, Jim sent her a message to schedule a meeting. A surge of apprehension washed over him, but he didn't pause to rethink his decision. The day progressed, and each interaction felt like an opportunity, each conversation a stepping stone. Reaching out was uncomfortable, yet oddly empowering. By lunchtime, Jim was riding a tide of momentum. As he revisited his notes, he also infused them with passion, making sure to express not just data, but feelings. He realized he wasn't merely promoting a project, he was advocating a change in perspective. The meeting with Elena turned out to be an invigorating exchange. Discussing the landscape of their industry, he shared his vision with enthusiasm, noticing how her eyes sparkled at the mention of untapped potential. They debated strategies and dissected risks, and each time Jim articulated his ideas, he felt a piece of the shroud of insecurity lift ever so slightly. She paused, pen poised over paper, looking thoughtfully at him. "You're onto something here," she stated firmly. "This could be more impactful than you realize. What will your next move be?" Jim faltered for a moment. The question that should have been routine felt like a spotlight glaring down on him. But the earlier doubts were accompanied by a warmth of validation. "I need to start reaching out to investors, see who might resonate with our goals," he replied, the confidence in his own voice surprising him. That evening, after rifling through a list of potential partners, an idea struck him. What if he could create a presentation that outlined not only their goals, but intertwined personal stories, including his own? It could resonate more deeply, drive home the emotional commitment driving the project. He felt adrenaline surge in his veins at the thought. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating space for others to share their stories too, perhaps even fostering deeper connections than he had ever formed before. As he prepared his outline, his mind inevitably returned to the shadowy figures of self-doubt that had clouded his vision. However, each brush against that lingering introspection felt different now. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was forging himself in the crucible of ambition, the very idea igniting a flame within him. But with that burgeoning confidence came a wider expanse of uncertainty. The success he craved was no longer a distant mirage. It was tangible, sculpted from effort and vision. Yet with pursuit came the inevitable confrontation of fears. What if he couldn't carry the weight? Standing at the precipice of this new phase, Jim felt the disquieting pull of those fears, yet resolutely chose to press onward. He would dive headfirst into this transformation, ready to face the challenges ahead. With each word typed, he could feel the resolve solidifying within, no longer a mere appearance, but an internal metamorphosis. What awaited him on the other side of this endeavor remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would not only confront his fears, he would also discover the strength he never knew he possessed. As he shut his laptop, a question loomed large. Could he unearth the true potential that lay silent within him all along? And how would he manage the rising stakes as he approached this uncharted horizon? Jim spent the following days in a fervor, a whirlwind of ideas and growing determination. As the sun enveloped the city in a warm glow, he transformed his living space into a makeshift creative hub. The walls around him filled with sketches and notes, each representing a step toward an ambitious destination. Yet, in the midst of this intensity, the tremors of doubt still threatened to crack through his burgeoning confidence. Each morning began with a ritual, a moment spent in front of the mirror that had once drained his spirits. Now he stood before it with resolve, reminding himself that just beyond the uncertainty there lay opportunity. This morning, however, as he prepared for another day of strategizing, a different message ignited in his head. The weight of his past experiences held power, and he needed to leverage them fully. The janitor's tales, once wrapped in shadows, now could serve as a bridge to understanding and connective storytelling. He found himself narrowing his focus strategically. Jim split his presentation into 3 key parts: the emotional core, the market potential, and the actionable steps forward. He began to visualize not just the supporters, but also the skeptics he might encounter, each representing a crucible where his confidence would again be tested. He anticipated their questions, crafting both responses and rebuttals to fortify his arguments. Elena's affirmations still echoed in his mind, and he decided to include her insights in his proposal. Not only should he articulate his vision, he also needed to demonstrate its feasibility through data and projections. With each revision of his outline, he encouraged feedback, realizing that collaboration not only strengthened his proposal, but expanded his own understanding. Reaching out to colleagues for input had shifted from a necessary evil to a source of collaborative synergy. As he immersed himself deeper into preparation, he set up another meeting with Elena, eager to iterate on their previous conversation. The tension was palpable as anticipation pulsed in the air, a reminder that vulnerability had become a strength instead of a liability. It was in this space of honest engagement that Jim realized he owed much of this newfound clarity to the people around him, those who amplified his voice and demand his narrative. When they reconvened, the room felt electric. Elena listened attentively as Jim presented his latest ideas, animatedly explaining how his personal story could intertwine with the project's objectives. As he spoke, he felt a dual transformation. One was within himself, where hesitation began to dissipate, and the other was in the room, where they shared a vision that felt palpable. However, nothing tumultuous ever lacked its tempest. As he wrapped up the discussion, an email notification flashed on his phone. An investor he had hoped to attract, renowned for their no-nonsense approach, replied brusquely. "Your concept lacks grounding," it stated flatly. "Come back when you have real numbers." His heart sank momentarily, the familiar specter of defeat looming close. But this time it barely scratched the surface of his resolve. The disappointment, rather than immobilizing him, ignited a spark of determination. How was he going to turn this setback into an opportunity for growth? He quickly responded diplomatically, asking for specifics on their expectations and how his proposal could align better with their standards. As minutes turned into hours, Jim found a newfound space within himself, the awareness that feedback wasn't a judgment against his character, but rather a direction for growth. Instead of falling back into despair, he would gather advice, refine his approach, and tackle this head-on. He had transitioned from disparate thoughts to a coherent framework, from self-doubt to proactive strategies, yet layers of fear still lingered beneath this polished exterior. The stakes were rising as he prepared to face potential investors, each one representing both a risk and a reward. And as Jim settled back into his work, he found himself reflecting on the paradox of vulnerability and strength that had emerged through this journey. What resonated in his chest was not simply the urge to find success, but to authentically connect, to tell a story where others might find their own myriad struggles and triumphs. But in the recesses of his mind, the threat of failure lingered still. The time had come to face the most intimidating challenge yet, presenting his work to an audience that held his future in their hands. Would he falter or finally find his voice? The uncertainty hung in the air, pressing against his resolve. As he prepared to step into that arena, an insistent question gnawed at him. Was he truly ready for the next phase of this transformation? And could he handle the weight of true exposure? Weeks of preparation had fused into an exhilarating crescendo as Jim stepped onto the polished floor of the conference room. He felt the weight of the glass-encased walls closing in on him, a stark contrast to the creative chaos of his living space. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the acrid notes of anxiety that threatened to overwhelm him as he faced the group seated in front of him. Investors, skeptics, and power brokers awaited his words, each bearing the power to shape his future, each a potential ally or adversary. His palms clammy against the folder in his hands, he took a breath, recalling the numerous nights spent rehearsing in front of a mirror. The earlier ritual of transformation fueled his confidence, but that moment of truth had arrived. Now his resolve would be tested, not merely against uncertainty, but against the palpable skepticism hanging in the room. As he began his presentation, Jim consciously shifted the narrative from one of mere mechanics to a stirring tale rooted in authenticity. The janitor's stories drifted into his thoughts, their essence fueling the emotional core of his pitch. He wove in elements of his personal issues and triumphs, creating a tapestry that not only displayed numbers and projections, but also echoed tales of perseverance that would resonate deeply with those listening. Rising tension propelled him forward, each word crafted more carefully than the last. Yet, despite his calculated strategy, doubt lurked just behind his enthusiasm. Would they connect with his vision? Would they see value in the intertwining of his story with the operational details laid before them? When he finally concluded, silence enveloped the room. They exchanged glances, and Jim's heart thudded anxiously against his chest. He desperately sought affirmation in their expressions, but the air felt charged with a mix of interest and skepticism. Then came the questions, directed like arrows toward his carefully constructed arguments. "How do you plan to scale this effectively?" one investor queried. Another leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "What are your concrete numbers for the next 2 quarters?" Jim felt his pulse quicken, wavelengths of worry flooding his thoughts. It was the weight of doubt creeping back, a reminder of the brusque email he had received not long ago. The voices in his head echoed their criticisms, challenging his ability to match expectations. However, no sooner had despair begun to settle than he remembered his promise to transform objections into learning opportunities. He ventured into the answers, prepared meticulously, speaking clearly amid the advancing shadows of uncertainty. Each question became an opening, a chance to share his insight into the market, the research backing his proposal, and, even more importantly, his vision for change. As he spoke, the tension began to dissolve. One by one, their expressions softened. It was then, in the midst of this exchange, that a breakthrough flickered to life. He perceived an intersection between his ambition and their inquiries, a shared resolve that sparked a new possibility. Each investor became a component of his team for the first time. Each question turned into a shared moment rather than an interrogation, a testament to the complexity of elevating an idea into a venture. As the meeting unraveled into discussion, a realization slowly crystallized in Jim's mind. The true strength of his project resided not solely in his concept, but in the symbiotic relationships that could evolve from these discussions. Trust required vulnerability, and it was essential for his project to thrive. Finally, as the meeting drew to a close, a sense of hopeful trepidation enveloped him. Jim felt lighter, releasing some of the pressure he had cradled for so long. Yet, beneath the exhilaration thrummed the undercurrent of a looming truth. He hadn't fully addressed the very core of hesitation that continued to grip him, the fear of authentic exposure. The moment passed, and as he gathered his papers, the final question bubbled unbidden within him. If he dared to embrace this newfound openness, would it unlock potential that he'd only begun to tap? Transitioning from an idea to an investment was a step, but revealing his vulnerability, his own vision in the raw, was a leap. How prepared was he to navigate this new territory, where the path ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty? One thing was clear: his journey toward greatness was only just beginning. After the meeting, Jim stepped outside, the cool air hitting him like a splash of water, clearing the remnants of tension that had settled on his psyche. The weight of the discussions lingered, but the spark ignited within those moments was intoxicating. He could feel the energy coursing through him, a voice whispering that he was only beginning to take control of his destiny. It felt like a drug, and he craved more. As he walked, Jim couldn't shake the impression that the encounter had revealed not only his professional capabilities, but also threads of personal resilience he had been previously unaware of. Each question from the investors had become an opportunity to shed layers of self-doubt. Each reply chipped away at his previously encapsulated fears. It was clear that he had not just presented a proposal, he had offered a part of himself, a narrative that reflected his struggles and aspirations. Returning to his workspace, he sat at his desk, strewn with notes, sketches, and concepts waiting to be explored. The chaotic nature of his environment served as a mirror for his thoughts. Yet there was clarity now, a smoky haze that had lifted. Jim's phone buzzed, pulling him from reverie. It was a message from one of the investors, a request to meet again, a sign that they were intrigued. Excitement surged within him, but beneath that excitement was a tremor of fear. What more could he reveal about himself? What else did he want to share? The impulsive part of him yearned to dive headfirst into the next meeting, to further entwine his personal story with the evolution of his project. But the more calculated side urged caution. How much vulnerability was too much? He began to draft a plan, a comprehensive strategy that not only covered financial projections, but also delved deeper into the mission behind his company. the mission that had originated from pain and perseverance. He wrote about how every setback had uniquely shaped him, influencing every aspect of his work ethic. Each carefully chosen word became a bridge that led investors closer to understanding his vision. As he pushed through the evening, addressing every query that arose from his earlier pitch, something within him began to shift. He started reflecting on the janitor story again, the resilience that shone through his words. That authenticity had resonated with Jim as soon as he had heard it, transforming how he perceived his own struggles. Could he draw that same strength from vulnerability? Did he really believe that the experiences shaping his character could also enrich his business narrative? In that moment, an unexpected revelation dawned on him. He was no longer just a man seeking investment. He was an innovator trying to build relationships founded on mutual trust and shared narratives. Perhaps if he invited his potential partners to step into his world, to see not just the business model, but the heart behind it, he could ignite a fire that would fuel not only their collaboration, but more importantly, his growth. Determined, he closed his laptop, but an undercurrent of conflict brewed within him. This newfound understanding felt powerful, yet daunting. Was he truly ready to not only present numbers, but also to expose the very essence of who he was? The stakes felt higher than ever, and the pressure only intensified. His phone buzzed again, a quick reminder of the next meeting date. Jim's heart raced, uncertainty and excitement coiling within him. The time had come to face his fears and showcase his story. But would his leap toward vulnerability lead to empowerment or leave him feeling exposed? The air crackled with anticipation as he looked out the window towards the setting sun, an acknowledgement that the next step he took could illuminate paths he had never anticipated. Jim inhaled deeply, suddenly aware of how vital this decision would be, not just for his business, but for his very identity. Could embracing his vulnerabilities transform him from a mere entrepreneur into a leader? This moment simmered beneath the surface, compelling him forward, eager to find out how this would unfold. The framework for his evolution was shaping up to be as complex as the business he hoped to build. As his mind raced with potential outcomes, one question loomed larger than all others. In this quest for authenticity, what truths about himself was he truly ready to confront? In the days that followed, Jim found himself enveloped in a whirlwind of preparation. Each encounter with investors took on a new dimension. No longer just a series of rehearsed lines and projected numbers. These meetings transformed into opportunities for genuine connection and storytelling. He discovered that by sharing his personal narrative, framed through the lens of his ambitions and struggles, he could evoke empathy and inspire trust. The day of the follow-up meeting arrived. Jim stood before a boardroom filled with executives, his heart hammering, but not with fear. This time it was the exhilaration of opportunity. As he began to speak, he interwove his journey as a janitor and aspiring poet with the intricacies of the project. He painted a vivid picture of his realizations, that true innovation stems from understanding the pulse of everyday life. The technology they were trying to create needed not just to function, but to resonate on a human level. Each marked line on these blueprints isn't just a revision, Jim declared, his voice steady and clear. It's a reflection of voices that often go unheard, a reminder that innovation can rise from the most unexpected places. Each word resonated throughout the room, building an emotional connection that transcended the typical business proposal. As the meeting progressed, Jim became acutely aware of the shifts in the room. Concerned frowns turned into engaged smiles. Questions became inquiries for deeper insight rather than mere skepticism. The takeaway was unmistakable. Vulnerability was powerful, and his authenticity forged an unprecedented bond. When the final question was posed, a straightforward request for detailed projections, Jim responded not only with numbers, but with a narrative. Look, these numbers reflect not just projections, but the passion and grit behind them. They are not just data points. They represent the hopes of many, and they reflect my commitment to catalyzing change. With that response, Jim could feel the tide turning. The executive who had been dubious now leaned forward, eyes gleaming with intrigue, and asked how his life experience shaped his perspective on market needs. For the first time, Jim didn't just provide an answer. He recognized it as an invitation to deepen the narrative. He spoke of seeing students rush through hallways, their dreams palpable, and how his role had allowed him insights into their realities. By the end of the meeting, the atmosphere had morphed completely. Jim excused himself to step outside for a moment, the crisp air filling his lungs like a refreshing wave. As he exhaled, a profound sense of achievement enveloped him. He could hardly believe it. He had transformed panic moments into powerful connections through storytelling. Less than 2 hours earlier, he felt the weight of expectation crushing him. Now he had unearthed a sense of belonging, a recognition of his intrinsic worth as a contributor. As he walked back into the boardroom to receive feedback, the executive's encouragement enveloped him. They expressed interest in a collaboration, not just as funders, but as partners who respected Jim's vision. They saw promise in his concept and valued his insights. The struggle that once felt insurmountable had given way to tangible results, each moment of doubt fading into the backdrop of his evolving narrative. But it wasn't just external validation that marked his achievement. Internally, Jim had conquered the pervasive anxiety that had long accompanied him. Each step he took forward reminded him that his life experiences were assets, not hindrances. He no longer felt like an imposter within these walls of success. He was actively shaping its foundation through authenticity and insight. With each passing day, as discussions progressed, Jim polished his professional skills and transformed not just as a collaborator, but as a visionary. Eventually, he emerged as a co-leader in the initiative, guiding discussions on project direction and implementing changes that aligned both business goals with the heartfelt stories he valued. His growth was measured not merely in accolades, but in the interconnectedness he forged with his colleagues and partners. As he settled into his role, a clarity arose about the ongoing journey ahead. He recognized that each challenge synthesized a chapter in his evolving story, reaffirming purpose in every endeavor. Jim learned to embrace vulnerability as a foundational element of authenticity, no longer a mark of weakness, but a catalyst for partnership and innovation. Standing atop the building at Hawthorne University one afternoon, looking out at the intricate web of lives intersecting, Jim felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. He had finally stepped into the man he was meant to be, a creator and a storyteller, equipped with every lesson learned from his past. His simple janitorial uniform had become a relic of his history, linking the journey of a living embodiment of inspiration. As he closed that chapter filled with self-discovery, Jim recognized that life's most significant achievements often arise from the darkest corners of struggle. He had transformed from a janitor into a leader, turning dreams once buried under the mundane into a realized vision. This moment called for celebration, not through extravagance, but through the recognition of hard work and resilience that illuminated the path ahead. Jim proved not only to the world, but to himself, that dreams aren't confined to privilege. They are crafted from authenticity, vulnerability, and the courage to connect. The sun dipped low on the horizon as he headed back inside, ready to meet with his partners and discuss the next bold steps of their venture. Each decision soared forward with purpose. Jim had finally transitioned from being the invisible worker to a recognized contributor, his heart now fueled by aspiration and his mind clear as he ventured into new territories. And this time, as he traversed the path toward success, he felt fully capable and empowered to shape it into something great. He no longer asked, "Can I?" but rather declared, "I will," an affirmation of his newfound identity as both a leader and innovator. The moment called for action. He felt it in his bones. This was only the beginning of a life shaped by authenticity and expansion. He realized the stories within him weren't mere fragments of memory. They were the undercurrents of future endeavors, a testament to the resilient spirit capable of lifting others alongside him. As he turned back toward the future, every step echoed the promise of what lay ahead, a journey propelled by his willingness to meet the world with open arms and an open heart. This is your moment. Don't let it pass by. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about this incredible journey. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. True fans of personal overcoming stories know that supporting the channel is crucial, so take action now.